This is a video response to Alicia DeGroot, who replied to my last video on the abortion topic. I'm replying through video because the issues she brought up were thoughtful and deserving of a full response that can't really be reasonably fit into a single YouTube comment. I know you probably won't appreciate most of the things I have to say in this video, but I have tried to be respectful and honest in my response. I hope you can recognize that. If any of you would like to share your thoughts, please comment below and like and subscribe for more respectful digression. For the structure of this video, I'll start by explaining my perspective on morality to establish an understanding of why I think the way I do. Second, I'll address Alicia's comment about tearing foster children apart. Then I'll move on to the issue of adoption expenses. Fourth, the comparison of killing comatose people, and I'll finish by addressing Alicia's belief that banning abortion will reduce human sexual behavior. So I'm going to start my response to Alicia with an explanation of how I view morality in general, because it's hard for us to share an understanding on all these topics if we don't first have an understanding of how we come to moral conclusions. So my view on morality is this. If morality exists, it seems obvious to me that there is only one moral principle, just one, and that principle basically is behave in the best cumulative interest of all parties impacted by your actions to the best extent of your knowledge and ability. So I don't believe in specific moral laws. I simply believe that you must do your best to consider how your actions may impact everyone and choose to act in a way that best maximizes everyone's well-being while minimizing everyone's suffering. So now to respond directly to Alicia's specific points. She asked, would I advocate for the tearing apart of children in the foster care system because it's quick and painless, right? So this action would not comply with my previous moral principle, because in order to implement a system in reality where we're allowed to quickly kill off people who are likely to suffer after they've already been born, the laws surrounding that action would be way more complex, far more vulnerable to corruption, and absolutely more traumatic for everyone involved, in my opinion at least. I have a more conservative view on general government intervention. The more you try to regulate something, the more likely you are to introduce corruption. And corruption would absolutely occur if you gave people the right to simply walk up to others and execute them, even for good reason. I don't think I need to explain why vigilantism is illegal. So Alicia, I disagree with you here because I don't think that your scenario here plays out in the same way that abortion does. I understand why you made the comparison, but you cannot implement a solution for eliminating birthed individuals without creating a much larger set of consequences. It just doesn't play out the same as abortion. To answer the underlying concept of your question most directly, theoretically speaking, purely theoretically, this would never work, like I've already explained. If it was somehow possible for me to simply eliminate living adults and children who I knew were going to have more suffering in their life than joy, without creating an immensely corrupt system to implement that, and without creating a massive chain of suffering for everyone involved, uh, including the executors and their PTSD, well, then yes, theoretically, I would actually be okay with simply eliminating suffering people, but that would obviously never happen. So I don't think that really compares to the consequences and benefits of supporting abortion as it exists now. So you said that adopted babies live very differently from foster babies, which is absolutely true. But you also believe that if adoption costs were lower, then the issues with our foster system would be significantly or maybe even mostly removed. You didn't really specify, so I'm just making a guesstimate. Alicia, I think your take here is just absurdly optimistic. Lowering adoption costs wouldn't put much of a dent in the foster care overload at all. Yes, it does cost a lot, uh, but if you're thinking about adopting a child and thinking to yourself, I just can't spend an extra few $1,000s right now, then you are probably neither properly motivated or suited to become an adoption parent. Kids take a lot more than a few $1,000s to raise. If you can't sacrifice that, you don't want it bad enough. There's actually a partial positive that comes with forcing adoption to be somewhat expensive too, um, because it partially demonstrates your commitment to actually wanting to love and raise that child. Imagine if adoption was free and potentially undocumented child molesters were able to just fill out a few papers and basically adopt a new sex slave for until they were caught. There are consequences regardless of how cheap or expensive adoption becomes. The real problem is that people are selfish and they mostly, generally speaking, on average, will only care at the surface level. People are not willing to significantly sacrifice of their own time, energy, and money to raise someone else's child. Um, lesser kind actions, sure, but raising a child is a whole different story. Conservatives nowadays are kind of already seem obsessed with promoting and maximizing their own breeding opportunities. Many of them are looking at their own budget and thinking, can we afford another child of our own right now? But our nation is getting poorer, and if we are struggling to find budget room to have more of our own babies, why do you think we'll be dramatically more motivated to use that budget space to take care of someone else's child? I think this is just an unrealistically optimistic view of the human capacity for good. Moving on to your statement about us not being able to kill people in coma. Again, refer back to the single moral principle that I abide by. What actions can we realistically take in this situation which minimize suffering and maximize well being? People in coma are often in a very different situation where families have to calculate very complex equations basically regarding whether or not to take their loved one off life support. Purely theoretically speaking, purely theoretical, I don't have a problem with making a probability based decision about whether or not the comatose person should be eliminated. But again, the process for the process for implementing that kind of decision making will likely have different effects than the process for our current abortion process. This is a crazy complex conversation, and we could probably write a dissertation on it. But I'm going to cut myself short here because I think you understand what I'm trying to say. On to the next point Alicia raised. So the issue here is, will banning abortion significantly minimize the number of people having unprotected casual sex, essentially? Uh, Honestly, Alicia, the fact that you think this actually makes a difference greater than a drop in the ocean tells me you probably come from a similarly principled background like mine, that maybe doesn't quite correlate with the average human experience, or maybe there's another sexual issue under the hood that's influencing your opinion here. Um, Let me ask you this. Looking at how the rest of the world operates, what human behaviors would you say are harder to control than sex? Maybe literally dying of thirst or hunger? People will gladly skip a few meals in exchange for sex when they really want it. There really isn't any other behavior I can think of that humans have less control over than their sexual desire. It's the reason men can't use the pull-out method. Sorry if I make some of you uncomfortable. Obviously, it's not entirely effective, just like any other birth control method is, but if you think about the action itself, it doesn't seem like withdrawing should be a difficult practice for a man, but that obviously isn't how humans operate. When humans experience feelings like anger or arousal, your brain literally shuts down the mental processes you use to perform critical thinking. And if you don't believe me, just look up John Gottman's research on the brain's adrenaline response when you're having a heated argument with your spouse or loved one. Do you really think that, teenagers are thinking about the consequences of their sexual activity when they're involved in the act or when they're in the mood? Um, let alone the average adult engaged in casual unprotected sex. Consequences aren't even a part of the equation most of the time when people are wanting to have sex. We've had condoms for a long time, and we can't get people to use them, and they're fairly effective. I really feel like I shouldn't. I don't feel like I should have to respond to this part of your response. I just think it's absurdly out of touch uh, with human nature.